This training on overtime compliance is presented by the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District Human Resources Department. At the end of this presentation, you will understand what overtime is and how it is calculated, how important it is to communicate with your supervisor regarding overtime, why you must take a duty-free lunch, and the importance of clocking in and out using TCP and entering notes for any additional hours worked outside of your normal shift. Classified staff work a variety of regular schedules and hours. Your schedule is typically determined by the school you work at and your supervisor. The number of hours you work are determined by your job description. No classified staff should work more than 7.5 hours per day or 37.5 hours per work week unless the time is specifically approved by your supervisor. Overtime for classified staff is any time worked in the employee's regular job classification over and above 8 hours a day or 40 hours per week and the 6th day in a work week. Overtime is paid at 1.5 times the employee's regular rate of pay. Employees who have a second part-time position outside their regular job classification receive overtime wages based on their rate of pay for the additional work assignment after completing a total of 40 hours per work week. During the summer, the district has a summer calendar that consists of a 4-day work week for up to 10 hours per day at the regular rate of pay. The negotiated agreement allows for this, but stipulates that the 5th, 6th, and 7th day worked during the work week will be paid as overtime. No classified staff should work more than their designated daily and/or weekly hours unless the time is specifically approved by your supervisor. It is best to get the approval in writing. The overtime authorization form is found on the Human Resources website. Compensatory time is not allowed. Comp time is defined as paid time off in lieu of overtime pay granted to an employee for working hours above and beyond the regular work week. Please refer to the annual overtime memo for more information. You should have received this via email, and the information can also be found on the Human Resources website under Forms and Documents. The following slides will offer some practical suggestions for how you can deal with overtime compliance. There are 2 key components here. Overtime is permitted with the approval of your supervisor. The Fair Labor Standard Act, also known as FLSA, requires that hourly employees be compensated for all hours worked. The second thing is communication. Communication is critical because the expectation regarding the approval of overtime is a shared responsibility between the supervisor and the employee for when overtime is needed and when it is allowed. Time Clock Plus automatically calculates the number of hours you work each day and each week. You are encouraged to approve your timesheet each day, especially if you have overtime hours. If you work overtime hours, you must put a note in TCP regarding the reason for the overtime hours. Keep in mind that you still need approval from your supervisor prior to working overtime. So what must you do in order to comply with overtime rules and expectations for your job? The first thing that you must do is you must get approval from your supervisor in advance. The approval is preferably in writing. The annual overtime memo states, all overtime must be approved in advance by the employee's supervisor except in urgent situations, as defined by the supervisor. While employees will be paid for all overtime hours worked, employees who fail to obtain prior approval to working hours that extend beyond their normal approved workday or week will be subject to disciplinary action. Repeated offenses may result in termination. Secondly, you must report all hours worked. Lunch breaks should be duty-free. If you do work during these times, this is not considered duty-free. Finally, be sure to clock in and out on time each day. Remember, you cannot exceed your regular work hours without express permission from your supervisor. You can't volunteer to do the same job you are paid for. This means you can't work your normal work shift and then continue to work until 8 o'clock that night and claim you are volunteering the additional hours. Comp time isn't permitted. For instance, you come to work at 7:30 in the morning and then work until 8:30 that night. You can't count your regular work shift hours for that day and then bank the remaining 4 hours for another time. This isn't allowed. You can't work during your duty-free lunch. This is because if you are working and performing any duties that are considered or can be considered part of your job, then you need to be paid. Only work while you are clocked in. This means don't begin working when you arrive at work and then clock in when your shift is supposed to start. Conversely, do not clock out at the end of your shift and continue working. There are some common questions that continually resurface regarding the topic of overtime. Let's look at some of those. So what happens if I can't get prior approval for overtime? There are times when your supervisor or principal are not in the building and the need for overtime occurs. For example, if your supervisor has left the building and you have a student that has not been picked up, you can't leave that child unattended. So in a case like this, you might exceed your regular work hours. When you clock out for the day, you need to add a note to your TCP record with the reason why you worked the additional hours. Don't include the name or names of students in any of your TCP records. Student safety is the top priority for this district. However, it does not supersede the need to get approval for overtime. Student safety and communicating with your supervisor are both important in this situation. Because many employees have significant workloads with defined timelines, the question that arises most often is, how will I get all my work completed during the day, especially that important project with a specific due date? Communication continues to be the key to the answer to this question. Once you've communicated with your principal about your need for help with a deadline, your supervisor could have one of several options. Your supervisor could reprioritize your workload and push that deadline back so no overtime would be needed. A second option could be that your supervisor assigns someone to assist you with your task and that between the two of you, you can accomplish this task within the project timeframe and working within your normal hours. A third option your supervisor could present to you is that this deadline is a firm deadline and approve you to work a specific number of overtime hours in which to accomplish the task. Again, communication is the key. Communicate with your supervisor your workload and the need for any overtime. The next question is, how do I handle parents or customers who need assistance during lunch? This is an excellent question. Customer service is very important. In situations like this, you need to be aware of your positioning. If you are positioned in a work area where customers expect service or support, you cannot tell a customer who walks up to your desk that you are on lunch and therefore you can't help them. What you can do, particularly if you are in an office or a school where there is more than one staff person, is you can arrange your lunch so that the office area is always staffed by at least one person during your duty-free lunch. If you are in a position where you are the only one in the office, it's important to communicate with your supervisor on how you will cover the office area while you are on lunch. You want to be able to provide quality customer service, but also abide by the overtime compliance regulations. Employees may not perform work-related activities when arriving early or staying late to their work area unless approved in advance by their supervisor. Again, this is a positioning issue. It's virtually impossible to prove you are not working or impossible to not be tempted to work if you are in your work area. As soon as you arrive in your work location, you'll probably begin to notice that blinking button on the phone indicating you have voicemails. You'll turn on your computer and see the emails that are piling up, or any of the other myriad of tasks awaiting you. Then the phone rings and you answer it. Before you know it, you're actually working and you haven't clocked in. Remember, per the Fair Labor Standard Act, hourly employees must be paid for the hours they work. If you are in a situation where you need to arrive early or leave late, whether it's a carpooling situation or you are hanging out at work waiting for that dinner meeting with your friends, then positioning yourself to not be at your work area during these times is the practical solution. You can go to the designated break area or be someplace other than the area in which you normally work. If you are in a school where students are in the classroom, again, don't put yourself in that environment where you will be working overtime. Be conscious of where you are in relationship to your work and how that affects overtime compliance. What if I want to volunteer in my child's classroom or school? Overtime does not mean you cannot volunteer anymore. Many employees in the district have children and therefore have legitimate opportunities to volunteer in their classes or school. The Fair Labor Standard Act states that employees may not volunteer to perform the same types of services and duties which they are employed to do. As an employee, you can volunteer for the normal activities that parents volunteer for: reading to students, monitoring the playground, copying papers for teachers, etc. You can do this because it's clear that these are the normal types of activities that any parent would do for the school or the teacher, and these volunteer activities fall outside of your normal job duties and your normal hours. I work more than one job with the district. Who tracks my overtime? Simply put, you do through TCP. You do this by clocking in and out using the assigned job code for each position in the district. For example, in your normal day job, you are an aide in a school. You will clock in with a job code for that job. After school hours are over, you also work in the after-school program. You will need to clock out of your aide job and then clock back in with your after-school program job code. It's always good practice to inform both your regular supervisor and the after-school program supervisor that the additional work may result in overtime. Chances are your supervisors know this, but you can never go wrong in continuing to communicate. Where can I find more information? Your ESSA negotiated agreement clearly outlines the expectation of the district for overtime compliance. Also, the yearly overtime compliance memo reinforces the information contained in this video presentation. In summary, the Fair Labor Standards Act requires that employees be paid for time worked. This includes overtime hours. The ESSA negotiated agreement and the annual overtime memo both have specific information regarding overtime. Refer to these documents when you have questions. Communication is key. Always get prior approval for any overtime that is worked, and also put a note in TCP with the reason for the overtime. Thank you for being a dedicated member of the Fairbanks North Starborough School District team tasked with the safety and well-being of our students.